Have you ever stopped to think about what makes us human? Most of us would point to our cities, our technology, our ability to communicate complex ideas. We're proud of being the first species on Earth to build what we call civilization. But what if I told you that this assumption might be completely wrong? What if another species beat us to it by millions of years? Picture this. You're walking through a forest, completely unaware that beneath your feet lie the remnants of a world so ancient and so alien that it challenges everything we think we know about intelligence on Earth. The creatures that might have built this world weren't small and furry like our early ancestors. They were massive, scaled, and ruled the planet for over 160 million years. They were dinosaurs. Now I know what you're thinking. Dinosaurs were just big, dumb reptiles, right? Mindless beasts that spent their days eating plants or hunting prey until an asteroid wiped them out. That's the story we've all been told. But modern science is painting a very different picture, and it's absolutely fascinating. Here's something that'll blow your mind. Dinosaurs dominated Earth for a time span that's almost impossible to comprehend. While humans have only existed in our current form for about 300,000 years, dinosaurs ruled for over 160 million years. That's more than 500 times longer than we've been around. To put it in perspective, if all of recorded human history was compressed into a single day, dinosaurs would have had over 4 years to develop and evolve. So here's the million-dollar question. In all that time, with all that evolutionary pressure and opportunity, is it possible that some dinosaurs developed intelligence? Could they have built societies, created tools, maybe even constructed their own version of civilization? And if they did, would we even know about it today? This isn't just some wild fantasy. Scientists are seriously considering this possibility, and the implications are staggering. If dinosaurs did build a civilization, it would completely rewrite our understanding of intelligence, evolution, and our place in the universe. We'd go from being the first intelligent species on Earth to being the second, and that changes everything. Let me start by addressing the elephant in the room, or should I say, the triceratops in the room. When most people think about dinosaur intelligence, they imagine something like the velociraptors from Jurassic Park. Clever hunters that could open doors and set traps. But what if the reality was far more sophisticated than anything Hollywood could dream up? The truth is, we've been seriously underestimating dinosaur intelligence for decades. The old stereotype of dinosaurs as cold-blooded, sluggish reptiles with pea-sized brains is completely outdated. Modern research shows us that many dinosaurs were warm-blooded, highly active creatures with complex social behaviors. Some species had brain-to-body ratios that rival modern mammals and birds. Take Troodon, for example. This small theropod dinosaur lived about 75 million years ago, and it's become the poster child for dinosaur intelligence. Troodon had one of the largest brain-to-body ratios of any known dinosaur. Its brain was proportionally similar to that of modern birds, which, by the way, are descendants of dinosaurs, and show remarkable intelligence today. Think about what modern birds can do. Crows can solve multi-step puzzles, use tools, and even plan for future events. Ravens can recognize individual human faces and pass that information to their offspring. Parrots can learn human language and demonstrate understanding of abstract concepts. If these are the descendants of dinosaurs, what does that tell us about their ancestors' potential? But Troodon wasn't just smart for a dinosaur. It had forward-facing eyes that gave it excellent depth perception, crucial for both hunting and problem-solving. It had grasping hands with partially opposable fingers that could manipulate objects. And here's the kicker. It lived in social groups, which often drives the evolution of higher intelligence through the need for communication and cooperation. Now, I'm not saying Troodon was building skyscrapers or inventing the wheel, but when you combine a relatively large brain, good vision, capable hands, and social behavior, you've got the basic toolkit that intelligence needs to flourish. And remember, these creatures had millions upon millions of years to develop and refine these abilities. But here's where things get really interesting. Intelligence doesn't always look the same across different species. We tend to measure intelligence by human standards, but that's incredibly limiting. Octopuses, for instance, are remarkably intelligent despite having no backbone and a completely different evolutionary history. They use tools, solve complex problems, and show individual personalities. Their intelligence evolved completely independently from ours, yet it's undeniably real. So when we ask whether dinosaurs could have been intelligent, we need to think beyond human-like intelligence. Maybe they developed forms of thinking and problem-solving that were uniquely suited to their anatomy and environment. Maybe their intelligence followed paths we can't even imagine because we're trapped in our own perspective. The fossil evidence supports the idea that some dinosaurs were far more sophisticated than we once believed. We've found evidence of complex social behaviors, coordinated hunting strategies, and elaborate nesting sites that suggest careful planning and organization. Some species appear to have cared for their young in ways that required teaching and learning. Others lived in large herds that would have demanded sophisticated communication systems. And speaking of communication, this is where the story gets even more compelling. Many dinosaurs had elaborate crests, frills, and other structures that were likely used for display and signaling. Some, like Parasaurolophus, had hollow crests that could produce low-frequency sound that traveled for miles. This suggests they had complex vocal communication systems that could coordinate group activities across vast distances. But vocal communication is just the beginning. Visual displays were probably just as important. Modern birds use incredibly sophisticated combinations of colors, movements, and sounds to communicate everything from territorial boundaries to mating readiness to danger warnings. If dinosaurs had similar capabilities, and they had millions of years to refine them, who knows how complex their communication systems might have become? Here's something that really makes you think. Language and culture are what separate human civilization from everything else in the animal kingdom. Language allows us to share knowledge across generations, building on what came before instead of starting from scratch every time. If even one species of dinosaur developed something approaching symbolic communication, it could have been the foundation for accumulating knowledge and developing culture. And culture is the real key to civilization. It's not just about being smart as an individual. It's about being able to work together, share ideas, and build something larger than any single member of the species could create alone. Humans weren't necessarily smarter than other early hominids, but we developed the ability to cooperate and share knowledge in ways that amplified our collective intelligence. Now imagine if a species like Troodon had developed even basic cultural transmission. Maybe they started by sharing hunting techniques or warning calls about specific predators. Over time, this could have evolved into more sophisticated forms of knowledge sharing. Maybe they developed ways to mark territories or communicate about distant resources. Given enough time, these simple cultural behaviors could have blossomed into something far more complex. The timeline here is absolutely crucial to understanding this possibility. Modern humans have achieved everything we consider civilization in just the last 10,000 years. We went from simple farming communities to space exploration in what amounts to a geological instant. If dinosaurs had even a fraction of our learning ability and social cooperation, and they had millions of years to work with, the potential for development is mind-boggling. But here's the challenge that makes this whole question so fascinating and so frustrating at the same time. How would we even know if dinosaurs had built a civilization? The evidence we use to understand the past is incredibly limited and biased toward things that preserve well over millions of years. Fossils give us bones, teeth, and occasionally skin impressions or feather structures. But they can't show us behavior, intelligence, communication, or culture. They can't preserve wooden tools, plant fiber constructions, or temporary shelters. They can't capture the sounds of dinosaur languages or the complexity of their social interactions. Human civilization itself would be almost invisible in the fossil record if we disappeared tomorrow. Our buildings would crumble, our technologies would corrode, and our cultural achievements would vanish. After just a few million years, future paleontologists might find scattered human bones and assume we were just another species of clever ape, never realizing we had built cities, written literature, or traveled to the moon. This preservation problem is what makes the question of dinosaur civilization so compelling and so impossible to answer definitively. The absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, especially when we're talking about time scales that dwarf human comprehension. Think about this for a moment. The Earth is over 4.5 billion years old. It's constantly reshaping itself through processes that operate on time scales we can barely comprehend. Continents drift across the globe, mountain ranges rise and fall, oceans expand and contract. The planet's surface gets recycled through plate tectonics, melting old rocks and creating new ones. This means that most physical evidence from the age of dinosaurs has been ground up, buried, or completely erased. Even our most durable human monuments wouldn't survive this process. The pyramids of Egypt, which feel eternal to us, are only a few thousand years old. Give them another million years, and they'd be worn down to unrecognizable rubble. After 60 million years, they'd be completely gone. If our most impressive stone structures can't survive geological time, what hope would dinosaur constructions have had? This is where the story takes a fascinating turn. In 2018, two scientists named Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank proposed what they called the Silurian Hypothesis. Named after a fictional reptilian species from Doctor Who, this hypothesis asks a deceptively simple question. If an industrial civilization had existed on Earth millions of years ago, would we be able to detect it today? Their conclusion was both surprising and unsettling. They argued that direct evidence like buildings, roads, or machines would almost certainly be gone, but indirect evidence might still exist. Our own civilization is already leaving chemical fingerprints that could persist for millions of years. We're altering carbon isotope ratios through fossil fuel burning. We're creating synthetic materials that don't exist in nature. We're changing the composition of sediments in ways that future scientists might recognize as artificial. So, if we want to look for evidence of a dinosaur civilization, maybe we shouldn't be searching for ruins. Maybe we should be looking for chemical anomalies in rock layers from the Mesozoic era. Unusual concentrations of certain elements that don't match natural processes. Sudden changes in atmospheric composition that can't be explained by volcanoes or asteroid impacts. The problem is, we haven't found anything like that yet. When geologists examine rocks from the dinosaur era, they see the signatures of natural events. Volcanic eruptions, climate shifts, the occasional asteroid impact, but no clear evidence of large-scale industrial activity or environmental manipulation by intelligent beings. But here's the thing that keeps this possibility alive. Many of these chemical signatures would fade beyond recognition after tens of millions of years. The Earth is incredibly good at healing itself and erasing traces of the past. So the absence of evidence doesn't necessarily prove that nothing was there. It might just mean that time has done its job too well. Let's explore what a dinosaur civilization might have actually looked like, if it did exist. This is where we need to abandon our human-centered assumptions about what civilization means. We tend to think of cities, roads, metal tools, and written language. But intelligence might solve problems in completely different ways. Consider their anatomy first. Most dinosaurs didn't have hands like ours, but that doesn't mean they couldn't manipulate their environment. Elephants use their trunks with incredible dexterity. Birds build elaborate nests using only beaks and feet. Dinosaurs might have found their own unique solutions for tool use and construction. Smaller species like Troodon had three-fingered hands that could grasp objects, even if they weren't fully opposable like human thumbs. They might have used simple stone tools to crack open food or wooden implements for digging. Over millions of years, even basic tool use could evolve into something more sophisticated. But maybe dinosaur civilization wouldn't have been based on tools at all. Maybe they found entirely different paths to intelligence and organization. They lived in a world with abundant geothermal activity. Volcanic vents and hot springs were everywhere. An intelligent species might have learned to harness this natural energy instead of discovering fire the way humans did. Picture this scenario. A group of intelligent dinosaurs discovers that certain hot springs can be used to prepare food, making it easier to digest and extract nutrients. They start building simple channels to direct the heated water where they need it. Over time, this basic engineering develops into more complex systems for managing their environment. They might have used flowing rivers for transportation or communication, sending floating objects downstream as messages. They could have developed sophisticated systems of visual signaling using colorful displays, reflective surfaces, or arranged stones. Their architecture might have been based on living materials, carefully cultivated plants and trees shaped into functional structures that would leave no fossil trace. The more we think about alternative paths to civilization, the more we realize how limited our perspective really is. We assume that intelligence must follow the same trajectory we did, but that's probably wrong. Different species with different bodies and different environments would likely develop completely different solutions to the challenges of survival and cooperation. Social organization might have been their greatest achievement. Many dinosaurs already lived in herds, which requires coordination and communication. If one species developed enhanced social intelligence, they might have created complex hierarchies, specialized roles, and systems of knowledge sharing that didn't require any physical technology at all. Imagine a species where certain individuals specialized in memory and became living libraries, storing vast amounts of information about migration routes, food sources, and survival techniques. Others might have specialized in communication, serving as messengers between distant groups. Still others could have become environmental engineers, managing ecosystems to support larger populations. This kind of civilization would be almost completely invisible to us today. No stone monuments, no metal artifacts, no written records, just behavioral and social innovations that enhanced their survival and allowed them to thrive in ways we might never recognize as intelligence. But perhaps the most intriguing possibility is that they developed forms of biotechnology we can barely imagine. Living in a world teeming with diverse life forms, they might have learned to domesticate or selectively breed other species for specific purposes. Maybe they cultivated certain plants for food or medicine. Maybe they trained other dinosaurs for transportation or labor. Some modern animals already show the beginnings of this kind of behavior. Leaf-cutter ants cultivate fungus gardens. Certain birds and mammals use other species as tools or partners. Given millions of years of evolution, these partnerships could have developed into something far more sophisticated. The key insight here is that intelligence doesn't necessarily require the kind of physical technology we associate with human civilization. It might manifest as biological engineering, social organization, or environmental management. These forms of intelligence would be just as valid and potentially just as powerful as our own technological approach. This brings us to one of the most profound implications of the dinosaur civilization hypothesis. If intelligence has arisen before, it means we're not as special as we think we are. We like to believe we're the pinnacle of evolution, the first species to achieve true intelligence and civilization. But if dinosaurs got there first, we're just the latest experiment in a long history of intelligence on Earth. That thought is both humbling and exciting. Humbling because it challenges our sense of uniqueness and importance. Exciting because it suggests that intelligence might not be as rare as we assume. If it happened twice on Earth, maybe it's happening elsewhere in the universe right now. The implications get even more mind-bending when you consider what this means for our understanding of evolution itself. We've always thought of intelligence as this incredibly rare accident, a 1 in a billion lottery ticket that humans happen to win. But what if intelligence is actually a natural tendency of evolution? What if, given enough time and the right conditions, life inevitably develops complex thinking and problem-solving abilities? This isn't as crazy as it sounds. Evolution has independently invented flight multiple times. Bats, birds, and insects all developed the ability to fly through completely separate evolutionary paths. The same thing happened with eyes. Vision evolved independently dozens of times across different species. If evolution keeps rediscovering these solutions, maybe it also keeps rediscovering intelligence. And here's where the dinosaur timeline becomes absolutely crucial. Evolution needs pressure and opportunity to work its magic. Humans developed intelligence partly because we faced challenges that required creative solutions. We were relatively weak and vulnerable compared to other animals, so we had to get clever to survive. But we also had the time and social structure to develop and pass on innovations. Dinosaurs faced their own unique pressures: climate changes, predators, competition for resources, and the constant need to adapt to new environments. Some species lived in complex social groups where individuals had to navigate relationships, coordinate activities, and communicate effectively. These are exactly the kinds of challenges that drive the evolution of intelligence, but they also had something we never had: unimaginable amounts of time. Not just millions of years, but hundreds of millions of years. That's enough time for evolution to experiment with countless different approaches to intelligence. Even if the vast majority of attempts failed, the sheer scale of time available means that success was almost inevitable somewhere along the line. Think about how quickly human intelligence has accelerated once it reached a tipping point. For most of our species' history, we lived pretty much the same way as other animals. But in the last few thousand years, we've exploded into technology, art, science, and culture. Once intelligence reaches a critical threshold, it seems to bootstrap itself into rapid advancement. Now imagine that process happening over millions of years instead of thousands. A dinosaur species that developed basic intelligence could have had geological ages to refine and expand their capabilities. They might have achieved levels of sophistication that make our current civilization look primitive by comparison. But this raises another fascinating question. If dinosaurs did develop advanced intelligence and civilization, what happened to them? Why aren't they still here, ruling the planet instead of us? The answer might be more complex and sobering than we'd like to think. The mass extinction event that ended the dinosaur era wasn't just a single asteroid impact. It was a cascade of environmental disasters that lasted thousands of years. massive volcanic eruptions, climate change, ocean acidification, and ecological collapse. Even an advanced civilization might not have been able to survive such a comprehensive catastrophe. But here's a chilling thought. Maybe they did survive the initial disaster, only to face a different kind of extinction. Maybe they survived long enough to see their world dying around them, their ecosystems collapsing, their food sources disappearing. Maybe they watched helplessly as their civilization crumbled along with the rest of their world. This scenario isn't just speculation. We're seeing something similar happening today. Climate change, habitat destruction, and mass extinctions are threatening countless species right now. If we're not careful, human civilization could face the same fate that might have befallen the dinosaurs. The difference is we might have advance warning and the ability to do something about it. Or maybe the story has a different ending entirely. Maybe some dinosaur civilizations did survive the Great Extinction, just not in the way we might expect. Remember, not all dinosaurs died out. Birds are direct descendants of theropod dinosaurs, and they've thrived in the post-extinction world. What if the intelligence that some dinosaurs developed wasn't completely lost? What if it evolved and adapted, finding new forms in their descendants? Modern birds show remarkable intelligence. They use tools, solve problems, communicate with complex vocalizations, and some even demonstrate self-awareness. Maybe what we're seeing in birds today is the echo of ancient dinosaur intelligence, refined and adapted for a different world. Maybe the civilization we're looking for isn't buried in ancient rocks. Maybe it's flying around us right now, just in a form we don't recognize as civilization. This connects to a broader philosophical question about what we mean by civilization in the first place. We tend to define it in very human terms: cities, technology, written language, art, government. But these might just be the particular solutions that worked for our species in our specific circumstances. Other forms of intelligence might create entirely different kinds of civilization. A bird-like dinosaur civilization might have been based on flight and migration patterns that spanned continents. Maybe they developed forms of collective intelligence where information was stored and processed across entire flocks rather than in individual brains. Maybe their civilization was nomadic, following seasonal patterns and resource availability in ways that left no permanent structures but created incredibly sophisticated networks of cooperation and communication. Or consider the possibility of underwater dinosaur civilizations. Not all dinosaurs were land animals. Some were aquatic, and the ocean environment might have supported forms of intelligence and organization that we can barely imagine. Water-based civilizations would leave even fewer traces than land-based ones, especially after tens of millions of years of geological change. The ocean covers most of our planet's surface, and we've explored less than 5% of it. The deep sea is more alien to us than the surface of Mars. If advanced aquatic dinosaurs had built cities in the deepest ocean trenches, we might never find them. The crushing pressure, corrosive environment, and constant geological activity would erase almost any evidence of their existence. But maybe we're thinking about this all wrong. Maybe the question isn't whether dinosaurs built a civilization like ours. Maybe the question is whether they built something so different from our conception of civilization that we wouldn't recognize it even if we found it. Consider the possibility that they developed biological rather than technological solutions to the challenges of intelligence and organization. Instead of building machines, maybe they modified living organisms. Instead of creating artificial environments, maybe they learned to shape and manage natural ecosystems with incredible precision. This kind of biotechnological civilization might have looked completely natural to outside observers. No cities, no factories, no obvious signs of intelligence. Just carefully managed forests, precisely controlled water systems, and ecosystems that seem to run with unusual efficiency and harmony. The technology would be living technology, based on breeding, training, and biological modification, rather than metals and machines. Such a civilization might have been incredibly advanced by its own measures, while leaving almost no trace for us to find. Their greatest achievements might have been invisible forms of organization, communication networks based on chemical signals or bioelectric fields, or forms of collective intelligence that emerged from the coordination of millions of individual organisms. The more we explore these possibilities, the more we realize how limited our perspective really is. We're looking for evidence of intelligence that thinks like us, solves problems like us, and organizes itself like us. But intelligence might take form so alien to our experience that we literally can't see them, even when they're right in front of us. This brings us back to the fundamental mystery that started this whole exploration. The fossil record gives us tantalizing hints about dinosaur intelligence, but it can never give us the full picture. Bones and teeth can't preserve thoughts, cultures, or civilizations. They can only show us the physical remains of creatures that might have been far more complex and sophisticated than we ever imagined. And that uncertainty is what makes this question so compelling. We may never know for certain whether dinosaurs built civilizations, but the very possibility forces us to expand our understanding of what intelligence means, what civilization looks like, and what kinds of solutions evolution might discover given enough time and opportunity. It also raises profound questions about our own future. If intelligence and civilization have arisen before on Earth, they could arise again after we're gone. The planet has survived multiple mass extinctions, and life has always found ways to recover and diversify. Maybe intelligence is just another survival strategy that evolution keeps rediscovering. But perhaps the most important insight from all this speculation is how it changes our perspective on our place in the universe. We're used to thinking of ourselves as the only intelligent life in a vast, empty cosmos. But if dinosaurs achieved intelligence millions of years before us, and if birds carry some echo of that ancient intelligence today, then we're living on a planet with a much richer and more complex history of consciousness than we ever realized. The earth beneath our feet might be layered not just with rock and fossil remains, but with the invisible traces of minds that thought thoughts, solved problems, and maybe even wondered about their place in the universe just as we do today. That's a profoundly different way of understanding our world and our relationship to it. And it suggests that intelligence consciousness, and perhaps even wisdom are not rare accidents in the cosmos, but fundamental features of how complex systems organize themselves over time. If that's true, then the universe might be far more alive, more aware, and more purposeful than our current scientific worldview suggests. We started with a simple question about whether dinosaurs could have built civilizations. But we've ended up exploring some of the deepest mysteries about life, intelligence, and consciousness itself. And maybe that's exactly where such questions should lead us, into a sense of wonder about the incredible complexity and richness of the world we inhabit. Whether dinosaurs actually built civilizations or not, the possibility fundamentally changes how we think about intelligence and our role on this planet. But there's another angle to this story that's equally fascinating and perhaps even more unsettling. What if they didn't just build one civilization? What if they built many? Think about this for a moment. Dinosaurs ruled Earth for over 160 million years. That's not just a long time. It's an almost incomprehensible stretch of history. During that period, countless species evolved, thrived, and went extinct. Environmental conditions changed dramatically multiple times. Ice ages came and went. Sea levels rose and fell. Entire ecosystems appeared and disappeared. In all that time, with all those different species and changing conditions, intelligence might not have emerged just once. It might have emerged again and again, each time taking different forms and reaching different levels of sophistication. Maybe there wasn't just one dinosaur civilization. Maybe there were dozens, or hundreds, or thousands. Each one would have been shaped by its own unique circumstances. Some might have developed in tropical forests, others in coastal regions or mountainous areas. Some might have been built by small, quick dinosaurs like Troodon. Others might have involved the massive long-necked sauropods, creating civilizations based on their enormous size and reach. Still others might have emerged among the flying pterosaurs, developing aerial societies we can barely imagine. And here's what really makes your head spin. These civilizations wouldn't have been contemporaneous. They would have been separated by millions of years. One dinosaur civilization might have risen and fallen, leaving virtually no trace, only to be followed millions of years later by a completely different species that developed its own form of intelligence and organization. Imagine the first one emerging maybe 150 million years ago. A species of small theropods develops basic tool use and social cooperation. Over several million years, they create a simple but effective civilizations based on biological engineering and ecosystem management. Then climate change or volcanic activity drives them to extinction. The world moves on, their achievements forgotten and erased by geological processes. 50 million years later, a different lineage discovers intelligence. Maybe these are larger dinosaurs that develop sophisticated communication systems and create mobile civilizations that follow migration patterns across the changing continents. They thrive for millions of years before succumbing to another environmental catastrophe. Then, much later, perhaps just 10 million years before the final asteroid impact, yet another species achieves breakthrough intelligence. Maybe these ones actually do develop something closer to what we'd recognize as technology. but their time is cut short by the great extinction that ends the dinosaur era entirely. From our perspective today, all of these civilizations would be invisible, not just because their physical remains have been erased by time, but because they're buried beneath each other in layers of rock and history. We might be looking at fossil evidence from 3 different intelligent species and not even realize it because they're separated by geological ages. This scenario might sound like science fiction, but it's actually quite plausible when you consider the time scales involved. Intelligence has clearly evolved multiple times on Earth, even in the relatively short time since dinosaurs went extinct. Humans, dolphins, elephants, crows, and octopuses all show high-level intelligence, and they developed it independently through completely different evolutionary paths. If intelligence can emerge multiple times in just 65 million years, what could happen in 160 million years? The mathematical probability suggests that we should expect not just one emergence of dinosaur intelligence, but many. And each one would have faced the same fundamental challenge that we're grappling with today. How do you build a sustainable civilization that can survive environmental changes, resource limitations, and the inevitable catastrophes that periodically reshape our planet? Some dinosaur civilizations might have succeeded better than others. The early ones might have been relatively simple, barely qualifying as civilizations by our standards. But later ones, building on millions of years of evolutionary refinement, might have achieved levels of sophistication that dwarf our current achievements. Picture this possibility. The last dinosaur civilization, the one that existed just before the Great Extinction, had the benefit of learning from all the previous attempts. They understood the fragility of planetary systems. They had developed sustainable technologies that worked with natural processes rather than against them. They had created backup plans for surviving global catastrophes. Maybe they saw the asteroid coming. Maybe they had enough advance warning to prepare, but even the most advanced civilization might not be able to survive the complete collapse of global ecosystems. The asteroid impact triggered volcanic eruptions, blocked out the sun for years, and poisoned the atmosphere with toxic gases. It was an extinction event so severe that it eliminated not just the dinosaurs, but most large life forms on the planet. Yet even in this scenario, something might have survived. Not the civilizations themselves, but perhaps some of their knowledge or techniques. Maybe they had developed ways of preserving information that we haven't discovered yet. Maybe they created biological archives, organisms specially designed to carry important knowledge through catastrophic periods. This isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Many organisms today have built-in mechanisms for surviving extreme conditions. Some bacteria can remain dormant for millions of years and then spring back to life when conditions improve. Certain plants can survive fires, floods, and ice ages by encoding survival information in their seeds. Maybe advanced dinosaur civilizations learned to do something similar with their cultural knowledge. If that's true, then traces of dinosaur wisdom might still exist in the natural world around us. Maybe some of the complex behaviors we see in modern animals aren't just instinct, but inherited knowledge from their ancient predecessors. Maybe the incredible navigation abilities of migrating birds, or the sophisticated social structures of insect colonies, or the problem-solving skills of marine mammals all contain echoes of much older intelligence. This brings us to one of the most profound implications of the dinosaur civilization hypothesis. If intelligence has emerged multiple times on Earth, and if each emergence has left some trace in the biological systems that followed, then our planet might be far more intelligent than we realize. We tend to think of intelligence as something that exists only in individual brains. But what if it also exists in the connections between organisms, in the flow of information through ecosystems, in the deep patterns that govern how life organizes itself? What if the biosphere itself has a kind of intelligence that emerges from billions of years of accumulated experience? Modern science is beginning to recognize that ecosystems do indeed show properties that look suspiciously like intelligence. They self-regulate, adapt to changing conditions, and maintain stability through incredibly complex feedback mechanisms. The global climate system adjusts itself to maintain conditions suitable for life. Forest networks share information and resources through underground fungal connections. Ocean currents redistribute heat and nutrients in patterns that support life across the entire planet. Maybe these aren't just mechanical processes. Maybe they're the expression of a deeper intelligence that has been accumulating and refining itself for billions of years, shaped by countless experiments in consciousness, including possibly dozens of dinosaur civilizations. If that's the case, then we're not just living on Earth. We're living within a kind of planetary mind that has been thinking and learning for far longer than our species has existed. Our own intelligence might be just the latest expression of this deeper pattern, a new experiment in consciousness that builds on everything that came before. This perspective completely changes how we think about our relationship with the natural world. Instead of seeing ourselves as separate from nature or as the first intelligent life to emerge on Earth, we become part of an ongoing conversation that has been happening for hundreds of millions of years. Our thoughts, our discoveries, our civilizations all become contributions to a much larger process of learning and development. But this also means we have a profound responsibility. If we really are the latest experiment in terrestrial intelligence, then what we do with our brief time here matters enormously. We're not just responsible for our own survival and flourishing, but for continuing and advancing the deep work of consciousness that has been going on for geological ages. The dinosaurs, if they achieved intelligence, ultimately failed to survive the great catastrophe that ended their era. But maybe that failure taught important lessons that are now encoded in the systems that govern our world. Maybe the stability of our current climate, the resilience of modern ecosystems, and even the conditions that allowed human intelligence to emerge all reflect hard-won wisdom from previous experiments in consciousness. If so, then our task isn't just to build a successful human civilization. It's to learn from the successes and failures of all the intelligences that came before us, to understand the deeper patterns that govern how consciousness develops on a planetary scale, and to make choices that will give future intelligence the best possible chance to emerge and flourish. This might sound abstract, but it has very practical implications. It suggests that we should be studying natural systems not just as resources to exploit, but as libraries of ancient wisdom. Every ecosystem might contain information about how intelligence can organize itself sustainably. Every species might carry genetic or behavioral knowledge that took millions of years to develop. When we destroy forests, drain wetlands, or drive species to extinction, we might be erasing knowledge that could be crucial for our own long-term survival. We might be destroying the very systems that could teach us how to build civilizations that last not just for thousands of years, but for millions. The dinosaur civilization hypothesis, whether it's literally true or not, forces us to think on these longer time scales. It reminds us that intelligence is not just about building better technology or accumulating more information. It's about learning to live in harmony with the deeper patterns that govern how complex systems evolve and persist over time. And maybe that's the most important lesson we can take from this entire thought experiment. Whether dinosaurs built cities or developed technologies, whether they achieved forms of consciousness we can't even imagine, the very possibility expands our understanding of what intelligence means and what it's for. Intelligence isn't just about solving immediate problems or gaining advantages over competitors. At its deepest level, it might be about participating in the long-term evolution of consciousness itself, contributing to a process of learning and development that spans geological time and connects all life on Earth. From this perspective, every human achievement becomes part of a much larger story. Our art, our science, our philosophy, our struggles to understand ourselves and our place in the universe all become contributions to an ancient conversation about what it means to be conscious in a cosmos that seems designed to create ever more complex forms of awareness. The traces of dinosaur civilizations, if they existed, are hidden beneath millions of years of rock and time. But maybe the real legacy of ancient intelligence isn't buried in the ground. Maybe it's woven into the very fabric of life itself, expressed in the stunning complexity of natural systems, the deep wisdom of evolutionary processes, and the remarkable fact that the universe has organized itself in such a way that it can become conscious of itself through beings like us. Whether we're the first intelligence on Earth or the latest in a long series of experiments in consciousness, we're participating in something magnificent and mysterious. We're part of a process by which the universe comes to know itself, learns about its own nature, and perhaps even influences its own future development. And that realization, inspired by wondering about dinosaur civilizations, might be the most profound discovery of all. We're not alone in our intelligence, not unique in our consciousness, and not separate from the deep processes that have been shaping reality for billions of years. We're participants in the universe's long journey toward greater complexity, awareness, and understanding. The dinosaurs had their chance to contribute to this process. Now it's our turn. What we do with that opportunity might determine not just the future of human civilization, but the future of intelligence itself on our remarkable planet. The question of whether dinosaurs built their own civilizations becomes even more intriguing when we consider what happened to the evidence. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that most people don't want to face. The Earth is incredibly good at erasing its own history. Think about it this way. Right now, as you're listening to this, the ground beneath your feet is constantly moving, not in ways you can feel, but on geological timescales that make human civilization look like a brief flicker. Continents are drifting across the planet's surface at about the same rate your fingernails grow. Ocean floors are being recycled back into the Earth's molten interior. Mountain ranges are being ground down by wind and water, their remains carried away to form new rock layers somewhere else. This process is relentless and thorough. Most of the Earth's surface that existed during the age of dinosaurs is simply gone. It's been melted, crushed, buried, or transformed into something completely different. The rocks we do have from that time period represent only tiny fragments of what once existed. We're trying to reconstruct 160 million years of history from scattered pieces of a puzzle where 99% of the pieces have been destroyed. Now, if you were a future archaeologist trying to understand human civilization from our fossils alone, what would you conclude? You'd find scattered human bones, maybe some stone tools, and virtually nothing else. Our cities would be rubble. Our books would have rotted away. Our digital records would be corrupted and unreadable. You might conclude that humans were just another species of moderately intelligent ape, never suspecting that we had built rockets, composed symphonies, or split the atom. This is exactly the problem we face when looking for evidence of dinosaur civilizations. We're not just dealing with normal archaeological challenges, we're dealing with evidence that's been subjected to tens of millions of years of the most thorough destruction processes imaginable. But here's where modern science gets really clever. If we can't find direct evidence of ancient civilizations, maybe we can find indirect evidence. Maybe we can look for the fingerprints they left on the planet itself. This is where something called the Silurian Hypothesis comes in. Scientists realize that our own industrial civilization is leaving chemical signatures that will persist long after our buildings have crumbled. We're changing the composition of the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels. We're creating artificial materials that don't exist in nature. We're moving vast quantities of elements from deep underground to the surface through mining. We are even changing the isotopic composition of carbon in ways that will be detectable millions of years from now. So the question becomes, if dinosaurs had developed industrial technology, would they have left similar chemical fingerprints? And this is where the search gets both exciting and frustrating. Because when scientists look at rock layers from the Mesozoic era, they see plenty of dramatic events. Massive volcanic eruptions that lasted for thousands of years, climate changes that transformed entire continents, the chemical signature of the asteroid impact that ended the dinosaur age. But so far, they haven't found the kind of artificial chemical signals that would indicate large-scale industrial activity. No unusual spikes in rare metals that might indicate mining. No isotopic anomalies that would suggest artificial energy production, no synthetic compounds that don't occur naturally. Does this prove that dinosaurs never developed advanced technology? Not necessarily, because here's the thing about chemical evidence. It fades. Over tens of millions of years, even the most persistent artificial compounds can be broken down, dispersed, or transformed into something that looks natural. Our own civilization has been pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere for less than 2 centuries, and we're already seeing measurable effects. But what would those effects look like after 60 million years of geological processing? The carbon would still be there, but it might be so thoroughly mixed and altered that future scientists couldn't distinguish it from natural variations. This brings us to one of the most mind-bending aspects of this entire question. The timescales involved are so vast that they challenge our basic assumptions about what can be known and what must remain forever mysterious. Consider this thought experiment. Imagine that tomorrow every human on Earth disappeared instantly. How long would it take for all evidence of our civilization to vanish completely? Our wooden buildings would rot within decades. Our steel and concrete structures might last thousands of years, but even they would eventually succumb to weathering and erosion. Our roads would be cracked apart by plant roots and freeze-thaw cycles. After a million years, almost everything we've built would be gone. After 10 million years, even our most durable monuments would be worn down to nothing. After 65 million years, the length of time since dinosaurs went extinct, the only traces of human civilization might be a thin layer of unusual materials and sedimentary rocks. And even that might be too subtle to detect without knowing exactly where to look. If our own technological civilization would be essentially invisible after geological time, how can we expect to find evidence of dinosaur civilizations that are far older and were built by beings with completely different biology and technology? But maybe we're approaching this question from the wrong angle entirely. Maybe instead of looking for evidence that dinosaurs built civilizations like ours, we should be asking whether they might have built civilizations so different from ours that we wouldn't recognize them as civilizations at all. Human civilization is based on a very specific set of solutions to the challenges of survival and cooperation. We build permanent structures, we accumulate material goods, we develop technologies that allow us to manipulate our environment in increasingly dramatic ways. But these solutions are shaped by our particular biology, our specific needs, and the environmental conditions we've faced. Dinosaurs had different bodies, different needs, and lived in very different environments. Their solutions to the challenges of intelligence and cooperation might have been so alien to our way of thinking that we literally couldn't see them as civilizations even if we found direct evidence. Think about this possibility. What if some dinosaurs developed a form of civilization based entirely on biological engineering? Instead of building tools from stone and metal, they might have bred and modified living organisms to serve their needs. Instead of constructing permanent buildings, they might have cultivated living structures that grew and adapted over time. This kind of biotechnology would be incredibly sophisticated, but it would leave almost no trace in the fossil record. Living materials decay. Genetic modifications would be invisible. unless we happen to find perfectly preserved DNA, which is extremely rare. A civilization based on biological engineering could have been more advanced than our own while being completely undetectable to modern archaeology. Or consider the possibility of nomadic dinosaur civilizations. Many dinosaur species appear to have been migratory, following seasonal patterns across vast continental landscapes. What if some intelligent species developed this into sophisticated civilizations that were constantly on the move? They might have developed incredibly complex systems of communication and coordination that allowed millions of individuals to move together in patterns that maximized resource utilization and minimized environmental impact. They might have created temporary structures that were assembled and disassembled as needed, leaving no permanent archaeological signature. Their entire civilization might have existed in the relationships between individuals, in shared knowledge and cultural practices that were passed down through generations but never written down or built into permanent structures. From our perspective, this would look like nothing more than animal migration. But it could have been a form of civilization as sophisticated as anything humans have achieved. The more you think about alternative forms of civilization, the more you realize how limited our perspective really is. We define civilization by the things we can see and measure: cities, tools, written records, monuments. But what if the most advanced civilizations are precisely the ones that don't need these things? What if true intelligence learns to work with natural systems rather than against them? What if the most sophisticated forms of organization are the ones that enhance and amplify natural processes rather than replacing them with artificial alternatives? From this perspective, a dinosaur civilization might have looked like a particularly well-balanced ecosystem. To outside observers, it would appear completely natural, but beneath the surface, every element would be carefully managed and optimized. Species would be selectively bred for specific functions. Migration patterns would be precisely timed to maximize resource availability. Environmental modifications would be so subtle and well integrated that they would be indistinguishable from natural processes. This kind of civilization would be incredibly stable and sustainable. It would work with the planet's natural rhythms rather than disrupting them. It might be able to survive environmental changes that would destroy technology-based civilizations like our own, and it would be essentially invisible to us. We might study the ecosystems it created for centuries without ever realizing they were artificial. We might admire their efficiency and balance without understanding that they were designed and maintained by intelligent beings. This possibility is both fascinating and humbling. It suggests that intelligence and civilization might take forms so different from our own experience that we're not even capable of recognizing them. It implies that the universe might be full of intelligence that we're blind to because it doesn't match our expectations. But it also raises profound questions about our own approach to civilization. Are we on the right track with our technology-based, resource-intensive way of life? Or are we missing something fundamental about how intelligence can organize itself sustainably over long periods of time? Maybe the dinosaurs, if they did achieve civilization, found better answers to these questions than we have. Maybe they learned lessons about sustainability, cooperation, and long-term thinking that we're still struggling with. Maybe their civilizations lasted not for thousands of years like ours, but for millions of years precisely because they found ways to work with natural systems rather than against them. If that's true, then the extinction of the dinosaurs represents not just the loss of individual species, but the loss of accumulated wisdom about how to build civilizations that can persist over geological timescales. We might be starting from scratch, trying to figure out solutions to problems that were solved long ago by minds very different from our own. But here's the thing that gives me hope. Intelligence, once it emerges, seems to have a way of rediscovering the same fundamental insights. The laws of physics are the same everywhere in the universe. The principles that govern sustainable systems are universal. The challenges of cooperation and organization face every intelligent species. If dinosaurs did solve these problems, then their solutions are still out there waiting to be rediscovered. Maybe not in fossil form, but in the deep patterns that govern how complex systems organize themselves. Maybe in the mathematical relationships that describe ecological balance. Maybe in the biological processes that have been refined over millions of years of evolution. In other words, maybe the legacy of dinosaur civilizations, if they existed, isn't buried in the ground. Maybe it's encoded in the very fabric of life itself, every ecosystem that maintains itself in perfect balance, every species that has found sustainable ways to thrive without destroying its environment, every biological process that achieves maximum efficiency with minimum waste. These might not be just products of blind evolution. They might be the inherited wisdom of ancient intelligence, passed down not through books or monuments, but through the living systems that survived when everything else was swept away. This brings us to one of the most important implications of the dinosaur civilization hypothesis. Whether or not dinosaurs actually built civilizations, the possibility forces us to expand our definition of what intelligence means and what it can accomplish. We're used to thinking of intelligence as something that builds tools and technologies that separate us from the natural world. But maybe the highest form of intelligence is the kind that integrates so perfectly with natural systems that it becomes indistinguishable from them. Maybe the most advanced civilizations are the ones that enhance life rather than dominating it. If that's true, then we have a lot to learn. Our current approach to civilization, based on rapid consumption of resources and dramatic alteration of natural systems, might be a primitive and ultimately self-defeating strategy. The real test of intelligence might not be how quickly we can build advanced technologies, but how successfully we can create ways of life that can persist and flourish over millions of years. The dinosaurs had their chance to pass this test. We don't know whether they succeeded or failed, but we do know that their time came to an end. Now it's our turn. The question is whether we'll learn from their example, whatever that example might have been, and find our own path toward truly sustainable intelligence. The possibility that dinosaurs built civilizations isn't just an interesting thought experiment. It's a challenge to think bigger, deeper, and longer about what intelligence means and what it's for. it's an invitation to consider that we might not be the first to face the fundamental questions of how conscious beings can organize themselves to thrive over cosmic timescales. And maybe that's exactly the kind of thinking we need right now, because the challenges we're facing as a species, climate change, environmental destruction, resource depletion, social inequality, these aren't just human problems. They're the kinds of challenges that any intelligent species will eventually have to solve if it wants to survive and flourish in the long term. The dinosaurs, if they achieved intelligence, faced similar challenges in their own time. The solutions they found, if they found any, might still be accessible to us if we're willing to look in the right places and ask the right questions. Not in museums or archaeological sites, but in the deep patterns of how life organizes itself sustainably over time. Whether we find those answers or have to discover them on our own, one thing is clear. The story of intelligence on Earth is far from over. We're just the latest chapter in what might be a very long book. And what we write in our chapter might determine whether that book continues for millions of years to come, or whether it ends with us. The dinosaurs had over 160 million years to explore the possibilities of intelligence and civilization. We've had only a few thousand years, and we're already approaching critical decisions about our planet's future. We don't have the luxury of millions of years to figure things out gradually. We need to learn fast, think deep, and make choices that will echo through geological time. Maybe that's the real lesson from considering dinosaur civilizations. Not that they definitely existed, but that the questions they raise about intelligence, sustainability, and long-term thinking are exactly the questions we need to be asking ourselves right now. The future of consciousness on Earth might depend on how well we answer them. The weight of this realization hits differently when you consider what it means for how we see ourselves. We've spent our entire existence as a species believing we were special, unique, the first and only intelligent life to grace this planet. But what if we're not the pioneers we thought we were? What if we're actually the second act in a play that's been running for hundreds of millions of years? This isn't just an abstract philosophical question. It has real implications for how we approach the challenges facing our own civilization right now. Because if dinosaurs did achieve some form of advanced organization, they ultimately faced a test that we're now facing ourselves. How do you build a way of life that can survive catastrophic change? The great extinction that ended the dinosaur era wasn't just a single bad day when an asteroid hit. It was a cascade of environmental disasters that played out over thousands of years. Climate change, ocean acidification, massive volcanic eruptions, ecosystem collapse. Sound familiar? These are exactly the kinds of challenges that our own civilization is grappling with today. The difference is, we might have something the dinosaurs didn't. We might have advance warning. We can see the changes coming and potentially do something about them. But that advantage only matters if we're smart enough to use it. And here's where the dinosaur story becomes both inspiring and terrifying. If they did build civilizations, some of them might have seen their end coming too. They might have had their own scientists studying climate patterns, their own equivalent of environmental monitoring, their own debates about how to respond to planetary scale threats. Did they try to adapt? Did they attempt to modify their civilizations to survive the changing conditions? Did some groups succeed while others failed? We may never know the answers to these questions, but asking them forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our own situation. Because here's the thing about intelligence and civilization. They're not guarantees of survival. Being smart doesn't automatically make you immune to extinction. Having advanced technology doesn't necessarily protect you from environmental collapse. The dinosaurs dominated this planet for an almost incomprehensible amount of time, and yet they still couldn't survive the ultimate test. But maybe that's not the right way to think about it. Maybe survival isn't the only measure of success for a civilization. Maybe the real question is what you contribute to the ongoing story of intelligence and consciousness while you have the chance. If dinosaur civilizations existed, they left something behind, even if we can't see it directly. They participated in the great experiment of consciousness exploring itself. They asked questions about their place in the universe. They solved problems, created beauty, formed relationships, and experienced the wonder of being aware in a cosmos that somehow organized itself to become aware of itself. That contribution doesn't disappear just because the civilizations themselves ended. It becomes part of the deep structure of how intelligence manifests in our universe. Every question they asked makes it easier for future intelligence to ask similar questions. Every problem they solved adds to the collective wisdom that guides how consciousness develops over cosmic time. From this perspective, our own civilization is both incredibly important and incredibly humble. Important because we're the current carriers of the flame of consciousness on this planet. What we do, what we discover, what we create, all of it matters enormously because it's adding to the accumulated wisdom of intelligence in our universe. But humble because we're not the beginning of this story, and we probably won't be the end either. We're participants in something much larger than ourselves, something that connects us not just to future intelligence, but potentially to ancient intelligence that walked this planet long before our species even existed. This changes everything about how we should approach the challenges we're facing. Instead of seeing ourselves as the first and only intelligence trying to figure out how to build a sustainable civilization, we can see ourselves as part of an ongoing experiment that has been running for hundreds of millions of years. Maybe the solutions we need are already encoded in the natural systems around us. Maybe the forests, the oceans, the intricate webs of life that cover our planet all contain lessons learned by previous experiments in consciousness. Maybe we don't have to start from scratch. Maybe we can learn from the successes and failures of intelligence that came before us. This doesn't mean the answers will be easy to find or simple to implement, but it does mean we're not alone in facing these challenges. The universe has been working on these problems for a very long time, and the results of those experiments are all around us in the form of stable, sustainable, natural systems that have persisted through multiple mass extinctions and dramatic environmental changes. The question is whether we're humble enough to learn from them and creative enough to adapt their wisdom to our own unique circumstances. Because while we might not be the first intelligence on Earth, we are definitely unique in our particular form of consciousness and the specific challenges and opportunities we face. Our technology gives us capabilities that no previous Earth intelligence ever had. We can see beyond our planet, communicate across vast distances instantly, manipulate matter at the atomic level, and even begin to understand the fundamental laws that govern reality itself. These are remarkable achievements that deserve to be celebrated, but they also come with responsibilities that previous intelligences may never have faced. Our power to alter planetary systems has grown so rapidly that we're now capable of triggering changes that could affect the entire future of life on Earth. We're not just responsible for our own survival, but for the continuation of the entire experiment in consciousness that our planet has been running for billions of years. This is where the dinosaur civilization hypothesis becomes more than just an interesting speculation. It becomes a call to think on longer time scales and take seriously our role as temporary custodians of intelligence in our corner of the universe. Whether dinosaurs built civilizations or not, exploring this possibility has revealed something profound about the nature of intelligence itself. We've journeyed from considering the vast time scales that dwarf human existence to imagining forms of civilization so alien we might never recognize them. We've confronted the humbling reality that our own achievements, however impressive, are just fleeting moments in Earth's deep history. The real power of this question isn't in finding definitive answers, but in expanding our understanding of what's possible. If intelligence has emerged before, it reminds us that consciousness might be far more common in our universe than we dare to imagine. And if it hasn't, it makes our own existence even more precious and our responsibility even greater. Either way, we're part of something magnificent, an ongoing experiment in awareness that connects us to the deepest mysteries of existence itself.